On a rainy night, a beautiful young woman with a kind heart saves a stranger on the brink of death, never imagining that he is the heir to a billion-dollar empire. With no memory of who he is, he finds refuge in her simple life, and little by little, an unexpected feeling blossoms between them. But the past doesn't stay lost for long. Secrets begin to surface, lies surround them, and fate puts everything to the test. When the truth threatens to tear them apart forever, what will be stronger, the weight of the past or the courage to write a new future? Stay until the end to find out. Before we continue, if you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're from. Let's begin. The rain wouldn't stop. It had been pouring for hours, turning the narrow streets into flowing streams. Mei Lin pulled her thin jacket closer, trying to keep warm as she packed up her remaining steamed buns. Another day of barely breaking even. At 19, she hadn't imagined this would be her life, working from dawn to dusk, selling food on the street corner just to keep a roof over her head. Thunder cracked overhead as she loaded the last of her equipment onto her cart. Most vendors had already gone home, leaving the usually bustling market street eerily empty. The streetlights cast long shadows through the rain, and Mei Lin quickened her pace. She couldn't afford to get sick. There was no one else to run the stand. That's when she heard it, a soft groan coming from the alley behind the closed electronics shop. Mei Lin froze. In this neighborhood, strange sounds at night usually meant trouble. The smart thing would be to hurry home, but something about that sound tugged at her heart. It had seemed so helpless. She stood there for a moment, cart handle still in her grip, having an internal debate. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, warning her about the dangers of being too trusting. But what if someone really needed help? Taking a deep breath, she turned her cart around and walked toward the alley. The sight that greeted her made her gasp. A young man lay crumpled on the ground, his expensive-looking clothes soaked through. There was a nasty cut on his forehead, and his breathing was shallow. Mei Lin dropped to her knees beside him, not caring about the puddle soaking through her pants. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck, the way she'd learned in a free first aid class at the community center. His pulse was there, but it felt weak. "Hey," she called out, gently tapping his cheek. "Can you hear me?" No response. She looked around desperately, but the street remained deserted. Her phone had only enough credit for emergencies, but if this wasn't an emergency, what was? She dialed for help, but after 5 minutes of being on hold, she realized she couldn't wait any longer. Her tiny apartment was only 3 blocks away. She could do this. Mei Lin looked at her cart, then at the unconscious man. There was no way she could manage both. Making a quick decision, she pushed her cart behind some boxes, hoping it would still be there in the morning. Then, with strength she didn't know she had, she managed to get the young man into a sitting position. "I really hope you're not a serial killer," she muttered, hooking her arms under his and starting to drag him. The rain made everything harder, but somehow she managed to move him, bit by bit, stopping every few meters to catch her breath. By the time they reached her building, her arms were shaking from the effort. Getting him up the stairs to the 3rd floor was another challenge entirely. It took her nearly 30 minutes, and by the end, she was completely exhausted. Finally, she managed to get him through her door and onto the old couch that doubled as her bed. In the better light of her apartment, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was probably around her age, with features that seemed too refined for this neighborhood. His clothes, despite being wet and muddy now, were clearly expensive. What was someone like him doing in this part of town? Mei Lin grabbed her first aid kit, a basic collection of supplies she'd gathered over the years. She cleaned the cut on his forehead carefully, applying antiseptic and a bandage. His breathing seemed steadier now, which was a relief. She checked his pockets for a phone or ID, but found nothing. Whoever he was a complete mystery. She changed into dry clothes and pulled her favorite armchair closer to the couch, wrapping herself in a blanket. She should probably try to sleep, but she couldn't bring herself to leave him unattended. What if he got worse during the night? What if he woke up confused and scared? So she sat there, watching his chest rise and fall, wondering what twist of fate had brought this stranger into her life. It was nearly dawn when his eyes finally fluttered open. He looked around, confusion clear on his face, before his gaze settled on her. "Where?" His voice was hoarse. "Where am I?" "You're safe," Mei Lin said softly, leaning forward. "I found you unconscious in an alley. Do you remember what happened?" He tried to sit up, then winced, pressing a hand to his head. I don't..." Fear crept into his voice. "I can't remember anything." "Why can't I remember anything?" "Hey, it's okay," Mei Lin said, trying to keep her own voice calm, despite her growing concern. "You hit your head pretty hard. I'm Mei Lin. Can you tell me your name?" He stared at her, panic rising in his eyes. I don't know my name. I don't know anything." His breathing started to quicken, and Mei Lin recognized the signs of an oncoming panic attack. "Look at me," she said firmly, taking his hand. "We'll figure this out, okay? For now, we need something to call you." She thought for a moment. "How about Jin? It means gold, because I found you in the rain, like a precious thing washed up by the storm." He squeezed her hand, clinging to this small piece of identity like a lifeline. "Jin," he repeated softly. "Okay, I can be Jin." The next few days were rough for Jin. Every morning, he'd wake up hoping his memories would suddenly come flooding back, only to face the same empty void where his past should be. He'd spend hours staring at his reflection in Mei Lin's scratched bathroom mirror, trying to recognize something, anything, in his own face. But it was like looking at a stranger. Mei Lin's mother, Auntie Hua, wasn't thrilled about having a strange man in their tiny apartment. She'd shown up the morning after Mei Lin found Jin, taken one look at him sleeping on their couch, and dragged her daughter into the kitchen. "Have you lost your mind?" she'd whispered furiously. "We can barely feed ourselves, and now you're taking in strays." But Auntie Hua's stern exterior cracked a bit when Jin woke up, and she saw the genuine fear and confusion in his eyes. She might not have liked the situation, but she couldn't bring herself to throw out someone so clearly lost. 3 days, she'd said firmly. "He can stay for 3 days while we figure something out." 3 days turned into a week, then 2. Jin tried to make himself useful, washing dishes, sweeping floors, anything to feel less like a burden. He picked things up quickly, as if his body remembered skills his mind had forgotten. The way he held chopsticks, how he automatically took off his shoes at the door, little things that suggested he'd grown up in a Chinese household. "You're doing it wrong," Jin said one morning, watching Mei Lin struggle with a broken rice cooker. The words came out before he even realized he knew what he was talking about. His hands moved automatically, fixing the wiring with surprising skill. "There, try it now." Mei Lin pressed the button, and the cooker hummed to life. "Look at you, mister. Fix it," she teased. "Any idea how you learned to do that?" Jin shook his head, frustration creeping back in. "It's like having a word on the tip of your tongue, but with everything. I know how to do things, but I don't remember learning them. I know I speak Mandarin, but I don't remember who taught me. It's all just there, but not there." Mei Lin started taking Jin with her to the market. She couldn't leave him alone in the apartment all day, and honestly, she could use the help. The first time they walked through the crowded streets together, she noticed how out of place he looked, even in borrowed clothes. He held himself differently from the other vendors and customers, his posture too straight, his movements too precise. But Jin adapted quickly. He learned to bargain with suppliers, though he was terrible at it at first. "Oh, you're too polite," Mei Lin laughed after watching him pay full price for vegetables that should have cost half as much. "You have to be tougher, or they'll smell the money in your pockets." "What money?" Jin grinned, turning out his empty pockets. "I'm as broke as they come." But something about the way he said it felt off, like he wasn't used to the words. They fell into a routine. Jin would help set up the stall before dawn, arranging steamed buns in neat rows while Mei Lin prepared the sauce. He was surprisingly good with customers, especially the elderly ones who'd stop to chat. There was something about his gentle manner that made people trust him instantly. What neither of them noticed were the men in dark suits who occasionally passed through the market, showing photos on their phones to other vendors. They were too busy building their little world, Jin learning to make change without counting on his fingers, Mei Lin teaching him her secret recipe for red bean paste, both of them sharing jokes and stories over late-night bowls of instant noodles. But sometimes, late at night, Jin would wake up in a cold sweat, fragments of dreams slipping away like smoke. Cars with tinted windows, meeting rooms with views of the city, a woman's voice calling a name he couldn't quite catch. He never told Mei Lin about these dreams, not wanting to worry her, but they nagged at him, like a puzzle missing too many pieces. "You know you can't stay here forever," Auntie Hua said one evening, catching Jin alone in the kitchen. She wasn't being unkind, just practical. "Sooner or later, your past will catch up with you. And when it does," she glanced toward the living room where Mei Lin was watching TV. "Just remember that we're simple people. We can't afford to get mixed up in complicated things." Jin followed her gaze, watching Mei Lin laugh at something on the screen. She'd saved him, given him a home when he had nothing, not even a name. The thought of his past coming back, of potentially bringing trouble to her door, made his stomach twist. "I would never let anything bad happen to her," he said quietly. Auntie Hua studied him for a long moment. "No," she finally said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "I don't think you would." She turned back to her cooking, but not before Jin caught the worried look in her eyes. "That's exactly what scares me." The nightmares always started the same way. Jin would be sitting in the back of a car, rain beating against the windows. Someone was talking, a man's voice, angry but muffled, like he was underwater. Then bright lights, the screech of tires, and that horrible moment of weightlessness before everything went black. He'd wake up gasping, his shirt soaked with sweat, the ghost of a name on his lips. Tonight was no different. Jin sat up on the couch, trying to slow his breathing. Through the thin walls, he could hear the quiet hum of the city at night. Distant traffic, a dog barking, the rattle of the old air conditioning unit. Normal sounds that helped anchor him to the present. Bad dream again. Mei Lin's voice made him jump. She stood in the doorway of her room, hair messy from sleep, wearing an oversized t-shirt with a faded cartoon character on it. "Did I wake you?" "I'm sorry." She waved off his apology and padded to the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of water. "Want to talk about it?" she asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to his couch. Jin took a long drink before answering. "It's always the same dream. A car crash, I think. And there's this logo that keeps flashing. Wang Industries. It feels important, but I don't know why." "We could look it up," Mei Lin suggested, but Jin shook his head. What if I don't like what we find?" He stared into his glass. "What if I was a bad person? What if I did something wrong, and that's why I ended up in that alley?" Mei Lin punched his arm lightly. "Hey, I'm pretty good at reading people, and you're definitely not a bad guy. You apologized to vegetables when you cut them wrong. You helped old Mrs. Zhang carry her groceries up 5 flights of stairs yesterday. Bad people don't do that stuff." The next morning, while doing laundry, Jin found something in the pocket of his old torn clothes, an expensive-looking watch with the initials WY engraved on the back. He sat on the building's rooftop, turning it over in his hands, trying to spark any memory. Nothing came. "Look what I found." Mei Lin burst through the roof access door, waving a flyer. Her excitement made him quickly pocket the watch. He wasn't ready to share this clue yet. "The Golden Dragon Wine Company is having a contest. They want a name for their new premium rice wine. First prize is 10,000 wen. Jin watched her eyes sparkle as she talked about all the things they could do with the money. Pay off some of Auntie Hua's medical bills, fix the leak in the bathroom, buy new equipment for the food stall. "So, what do you think?" she asked. "I want to help me brainstorm names?" Something clicked in Jin's mind when she mentioned wine. Without knowing why, he could picture endless rows of wine bottles, could almost smell the rich aroma of aging barrels. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think I might know something about wine." They spent the evening on the roof, sharing a cheap bottle of beer and coming up with names. Jin found himself explaining the subtle differences between vintages, the importance of terroir, the art of wine blending, knowledge flowing from some hidden part of his brain. "How do you know all this stuff?" Mei Lin asked, amazed. Jin shrugged. "No idea, but it feels right, like muscle memory. But for knowledge," he took another sip of beer. "What about Golden Legacy? It ties in with their brand, but also suggests tradition, history, something passed down through generations. That's actually perfect." Mei Lin scribbled it down. "Oh, we could add something about how it bridges past and present, tradition and innovation." As they worked on the submission, Jin watched Mei Lin's face in the fading light. She'd taken him in without question, given him a home, a purpose. She made him feel like he belonged somewhere, even without knowing who he was. The mysterious watch felt heavy in his pocket. Later that night, after Mei Lin had gone to bed, Jin finally looked up Wang Industries on her old laptop. It was one of the largest conglomerates in the country, with businesses ranging from real estate to technology. And there, on their website's front page, was the logo from his dreams. His finger hovered over the mouse, about to click for more information, when he heard Mei Lin's voice in his head. Focus on the present. He closed the laptop. Maybe she was right. Maybe the past could wait a little longer. But as he lay on the couch that night, he couldn't help wondering, was someone out there looking for him? And if they found him, what would that mean for this new life he was building? He touched the watch in his pocket, tracing the initials with his finger. W.Y. 2 letters that might hold the key to everything he'd forgotten, or destroy everything he'd found. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick, cream-colored paper with gold lettering. Mei Lin almost threw it away, thinking it was junk mail, until she saw the Golden Dragon Wine Company logo. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a check and a letter, congratulating her on winning first place in their naming competition. She ran all the way to the market, dodging pedestrians and nearly getting hit by a delivery bike. Jin was arranging their display of steamed buns, carefully adjusting each one to face the same direction, a habit that made her tease him about being too fancy for street food. "Jin!" she crashed into him, waving the letter. "We won! They picked our name!" He caught her, spinning her around once before realizing they were drawing attention. Other vendors were watching, smiling at their celebration. Jin set her down gently, but kept his hands on her shoulders. "Really? That's amazing. I knew you could do it." "We did it," she corrected him. "I never would have come up with Golden Legacy without you." She couldn't stop grinning. "They want us to come to some fancy ceremony next week. They're going to take pictures for their website and everything." Jin's smile faltered slightly. "Pictures? Don't worry," she said quickly, understanding his concern. "You don't have to come. I know you're still figuring things out. I can go alone." He shook his head. "No way. This is your big moment. I'll just stay in the background." The ceremony was held at the Golden Dragon Wine Company's downtown headquarters. Mei Lin wore her nicest dress, the one she saved for Lunar New Year, and even splurged on getting her hair done at the cheap salon around the corner. Jin borrowed a suit from one of their regular customers, and even though it was slightly too big, he somehow made it look elegant. "You look like you belong here," Mei Lin whispered as they walked into the gleaming lobby. All marble and glass. She meant it as a compliment, but something about the way Jin moved through the space, completely at ease among the luxury, made her stomach twist uncomfortably. The news of Mei Lin's win spread quickly through business circles. The story had everything. A young street vendor creating the perfect name for a luxury wine, the blend of tradition and innovation that captured the company's vision. Local papers picked it up, and soon her photo was appearing in business sections and lifestyle magazines. That's how Liu Rong found them. She arrived at their apartment building one rainy afternoon, her designer heels looking completely out of place on the cracked concrete steps. Mei Lin was alone when she knocked, Jin having gone to help Auntie Hua with her doctor's appointment. "Miss Mei Lin." The woman was elegant, probably in her 40s. wearing a suit that probably cost more than Mei Lin made in a year. "I'm Liu Rong, Executive Vice President of Wang Industries. May I come in?" Mei Lin's heart started racing at the company name, the one from Jin's dreams. She led Liu Rong inside, suddenly very aware of their apartment's peeling paint and mismatched furniture. "I'll be direct," Liu Rong said, pulling out a tablet. "We've been looking for someone." She showed Mei Lin a photo that made her blood run cold. It was Jin, or rather, someone who looked exactly like Jin, but in expensive clothes, standing in front of a Wang Industries logo. The caption read, "Wang Yinan, heir to Wang Industries, missing after car accident." "I don't," Mei Lin started, but Liu Rong held up a hand. "We know he's been staying with you. The wine competition photos confirmed it." Her voice softened slightly. "He's not in trouble. In fact, his father is desperate to find him. There's a substantial reward." "No." Mei Lin surprised herself with how firm her voice sounded. "I won't help you take him anywhere without his consent. He's not a thing to be claimed. He's a person." Liu Rong studied her for a long moment. "You care about him?" It wasn't a question, but Mei Lin answered anyway. "He's family now. And what if his real family has been worried sick? What if his father has been in a hospital bed for months?" Asking for his son, Liu Rong's professional facade cracked slightly, showing genuine emotion. "What if there are people who need him?" Before Mei Lin could respond, she heard the apartment door open. Jin stood there, frozen, staring at Liu Rong. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "Yinan," Liu Rong breathed, standing up. "Do you remember me?" Jin backed away slightly. I know your face." "But I don't." He pressed his hands to his temples, where his headaches always started when he tried too hard to remember. "It's okay," Liu Rong said quickly. "We don't have to do this all at once, but please, come with me. Let us help you remember." Jin looked at Mei Lin, his eyes full of confusion and fear. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. Mei Lin wanted to tell him to stay, to forget about Wang Industries and his old life, but she couldn't. Not if his father was sick, not if people were worried about him. "Whatever you decide," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm here. That won't change." Jin couldn't sleep that night. He paced the small living room, his mind racing with fragments of memories that Liu Rong's appearance had shaken loose. The logo on her business card matched the one from his dreams perfectly. Her face stirred something in his mind. Meetings in bright offices, polite smiles over teacups, hushed conversations in hallways. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the whispered conversation coming from the kitchen. Mei Lin and Auntie Hua were still up, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "You have to tell him," Auntie Hua was saying. "About the men who came asking questions last week." Jin froze, pressing himself against the wall to listen better. "I didn't want to worry him," Mei Lin replied. "He was just starting to seem happy, to feel settled." "Settled? Child? Look at that photo in the newspaper. He's the heir to Wang Industries. Did you think he could just keep selling steamed buns forever?" I thought. I don't know what I thought. I just wanted to protect him. Protect him? Or keep him? Auntie Hua's voice was gentle but firm. "You're falling for him, aren't you?" There was a long pause before Mei Lin spoke again, her voice barely audible. "It doesn't matter now. He belongs in their world, not ours." Jin felt like he'd been punched in the gut. They'd known someone was looking for him and hadn't said anything. All those times he'd talked about his dreams, his fragments of memory, and Mei Lin had just listened, saying nothing. He pushed away from the wall, anger and hurt churning in his stomach. The floorboard creaked under his foot, and the kitchen went silent. A moment later, Mei Lin appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide when she saw his face. "How long?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "How long have you known people were looking for me?" "Jin, That's not even my name, is it?" He ran his hands through his hair, frustration building. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or was it better to keep me in the dark, the poor lost rich boy playing at being normal?" It wasn't like that. Mei Lin stepped toward him, but he backed away. I was trying to protect you. You were so confused, so vulnerable. Those men who came asking, they seemed dangerous. So you made the choice for me. The hurt in his voice made her flinch. Did you think about the people who might be worried about me? My family? Or was it just easier to pretend none of that existed? That's not fair, she said quietly. If you want to go, go. No one's stopping you. The words hung between them like a physical thing. Jin grabbed his jacket, a cheap one Mei Lin had bought him from the market, and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, not looking back. If you only helped me for the reward money, you could have just said so. He heard her sharp intake of breath, knew he'd struck a low blow. Part of him wanted to take it back immediately, but the anger and betrayal were too fresh. He pulled the door open and walked out. A sleek black car was waiting outside the building. Liu Rong stood next to it, as if she'd known he would come. Maybe she had. Maybe this whole thing had been orchestrated perfectly. Ready to go home, Yinan? She asked softly. He got into the car without answering. As they pulled away, he caught a glimpse of Mei Lin in the window of her apartment, watching. He turned away quickly, but not before seeing her raise her hand in what looked like goodbye. The Wang Industries building was exactly like in his dreams, all glass and steel reaching into the sky. His uncle, Wang Jun, met him in the lobby, pulling him into a hug that felt both familiar and strange. "Welcome home, nephew," Wang Jun said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We have so much to catch up on." As Yinan now, followed his uncle into an elevator, something nagged at the back of his mind. A detail from his dreams, something about the car crash. But every time he tried to focus on it, it slipped away. "Your father will be so relieved," Wang Jun was saying. "He's been in and out of consciousness since his stroke, asking for you." "Stroke?" Jin frowned. "Liu Rong said he was in the hospital because—" He trailed off, realizing he couldn't actually remember what she'd said about his father's condition. "Memory's still spotty," Wang Jun patted his shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll help you remember everything you need to know." Something about the way he said it made Jin's skin crawl. But this was his family, wasn't it? This was where he belonged. So why did it feel like he was walking into a trap? The office they gave him was bigger than Mei Lin's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that made everything below look like toys. Jin, he still thought of himself as Jin, despite everyone calling him Yinan, stood at the window, watching tiny cars crawl through the streets far below. 2 weeks had passed since he'd left the market district. 2 weeks of crash courses in company policy, endless meetings with department heads, and careful conversations with Wang Jun about his father's condition. Everything felt slightly off, like a puzzle piece that almost fit, but not quite. "These need your signature," his new assistant said, placing a stack of papers on his desk. She was efficient and professional, but Jin caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, as if checking to see if he really belonged there. He picked up the first document, something about transferring shares from one subsidiary to another. The word swam before his eyes, triggering a memory, sitting in this same office, arguing with someone about these exact companies. "Wait," he said, scanning the document more carefully. "This doesn't make sense. Why would we transfer these assets now? The market evaluation shows—" He stopped, surprised by his own knowledge. "Very good, nephew." Wang Jun stood in the doorway, smiling that smile that never reached his eyes. "Your business instincts are returning. But don't worry about those papers. They're just routine matters." Jin set the document down slowly. "Where did these come from? Who authorized them?" "The board, of course. While your father is indisposed and you were missing, someone had to keep things running." Wang Jun walked to the window, standing next to Jin. "Beautiful view, isn't it? Your father and I used to stand here and plan the future of the company. Before his accident." Something in the way he said accident made Jin's head throb. More fragments of memory surfaced. Heated arguments, slammed doors, threats made in quiet voices. Meanwhile, across the city, Mei Lin received a strange letter. No return address, just her name typed on a plain envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message. Check the traffic cameras on Chang'an Street for the night of March 15. Your friend was not alone in that car. She stared at the letter for a long time, her hands shaking slightly. Part of her wanted to throw it away. Jin had made his choice, hadn't he? But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The way Liu Rong's story hadn't quite added up. The conflicting reports about his father's condition. The men who'd been asking questions before anyone officially came looking for him. Back at Wang Industries, Jin was piecing things together too. His assistant had left for the day, and he was alone in his office, going through old files. His memories were returning in fragments, each one more troubling than the last. He remembered arguing with his father about company direction. The older man had wanted to maintain their traditional business model, while Jin had pushed for modernization, sustainable practices, better worker conditions. Wang Jun had sided with Jin's father, but there had been something calculating in his support. Then he found it, buried in a folder of old contracts, a proposal that made his blood run cold. Plans to strip the company's assets, sell off its most profitable divisions, and move the money offshore. The date on the document was 3 days before his accident. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. When he opened it, his heart stopped. It was a photo of him and Mei Lin at the market, taken just days ago. Under it was a simple message. She's been asking questions. Would be a shame if something happened to her. Jin's first instinct was to rush to her, but he forced himself to think. If Wang Jun was behind his accident, if he was trying to take over the company, then racing across town would only put Mei Lin in more danger. He needed to be smarter this time. He pulled out his phone again, hesitating only a moment before dialing a number he'd found in his contacts, the head of company security, someone his returning memories told him he could trust. Mr. Zhang, it's Yinan. I need your help with something sensitive. And please, don't tell my uncle. Back in her apartment, Mei Lin was making a decision of her own. She'd spent the evening going through news articles about Wang Industries, about Jin's father's sudden illness, about the company's recent strategic changes. The pieces were starting to form a picture she didn't like. She picked up her phone, scrolling to the number Liu Rong had left her. Not for the reward money, she didn't care about that anymore. But if Jin was in trouble, real trouble, she couldn't just sit by and do nothing. Before she could dial, someone knocked on her door. When she opened it, she found Wang Jun himself, standing there, flanked by 2 men in suits. "Miss Mei Lin," he said smoothly. "I believe we need to talk about my nephew. May I come in?" She wanted to slam the door, but the look in his eyes told her that wasn't an option. As she stepped back to let them enter, she slipped her phone into her pocket, hitting the record button. Whatever was about to happen, she was going to make sure there was evidence. Mei Lin kept her face neutral, as Wang Jun settled himself on her worn couch, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit. His 2 men remained standing, positioned near the door like guards, or barriers to escape. "Tea?" she offered, buying time to think. Her phone was still recording in her pocket. "No need for pleasantries," Wang Jun said. "I'll be direct. You've been looking into things that don't concern you. That could be dangerous. I'm just worried about my friend." "Friend?" Wang Jun's smile was cold. "Let's be honest. You took in a confused young man, kept him in the dark about his identity, probably hoping for some kind of payoff. Well, here's your chance." He pulled out a checkbook. "Name your price to stay away from my nephew and forget everything you've learned." Mei Lin thought about Jin's gentle hands arranging steamed buns, his laugh when she taught him to bargain, the way he fixed things around the apartment without being asked. She thought about his nightmares, his confusion, the fear in his eyes when he left. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. "I want to know what you did to him." Wang Jun's smile vanished. "Careful, girl. You run a small business, don't you? It would be a shame if the health inspectors found violations, or if your mother's medical insurance suddenly had problems processing claims." Before Mei Lin could respond, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Don't react. Help is coming. Keep him talking. J. Her heart jumped. Jin. He was okay. He was helping. She just had to keep this man distracted. Actually, she said, forcing her voice to shake slightly, maybe we could discuss that check. She saw satisfaction flash across Wang Jun's face. He thought he had her. Across town, Jin was in the back of a company car with Mr. Zhang, watching a tablet screen that showed security camera footage from Mei Lin's building. Your uncle's men are in the lobby and the back exit, Zhang reported. But we have people in position. Jin nodded, his jaw tight. He'd spent the last hour showing Zhang everything he'd found. The documents about asset stripping, the records of suspicious transfers, the threatening message about Mei Lin. The security chief had listened silently, then made some calls. Sir, Zhang said carefully, you should know. We found irregularities in your father's medical records. His condition, it might not be what you were told. Another piece clicked into place. Jin remembered his last conversation with his father, just before the accident. The older man had called him to his office, saying he had evidence of serious wrongdoing within the company. They were supposed to meet the next day to discuss it, but then his phone rang. Liu Rong. Yinan, your uncle knows you accessed the old files. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's going to announce your engagement to Liu Kaifan. What? Who's Liu Kaifan? Daughter of his biggest supporter on the board. He's trying to consolidate power before you can move against him. She paused. There's more. I found records of payments to the driver who was supposed to take you home that night. The night of your accident. Jin's hands clenched into fists. Get everything to the police. And Liu Rong, thank you for telling me the truth. Back in her apartment, Mei Lin was still stalling. She'd managed to get Wang Jun talking about the company, watching his ego take over as he explained his grand plans for modernization. Of course, he was saying, some sacrifices have to be made. Your friend, my nephew, never understood that. Too soft, too concerned with worker rights and environmental impact, just like his father. And that's why they both had accidents? Mei Lin asked innocently. Wang Jun's eyes narrowed. One of his men stepped forward menacingly. But at that moment, the apartment door burst open. Company security flooded in, led by Mr. Zhang. Behind them came Jin, looking more like the powerful heir he was than the lost young man she'd found in an alley. Uncle, he said coldly, I believe the police would like to speak with you about some financial irregularities and attempted murder. Everything happened quickly after that. Wang Jun tried to run but was caught. His men surrendered without a fight. And then, suddenly, it was just Jin and Mei Lin, standing in her small living room like no time had passed. I'm sorry, they both said at the same time, then laughed nervously. I should have told you about the men asking questions, she said. I should have trusted you instead of running away, he replied. They looked at each other for a long moment, all the unspoken things between them hanging in the air. Finally, Jin stepped forward and took her hand. There's a lot I need to fix at the company, he said softly. A lot of wrongs to right, but I don't want to do it alone. Mei Lin squeezed his hand. You won't have to. The Wang Industries ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and champagne glasses. The company's elite had gathered for what they thought was a celebration, the announcement of Jin's engagement to Liu Kaifan. Security personnel dressed as waiters moved silently through the crowd, while plainclothes police officers waited in position. Jin stood at the entrance, adjusting his tie. The expensive suit felt more natural now, but he missed the simple clothes he'd worn at the market. Mei Lin appeared beside him, wearing a borrowed dress that made her look like she belonged in this world, even though she kept fidgeting with the hem. Ready? She asked quietly. He nodded, thinking of the evidence they'd gathered. Security footage showing Wang Jun talking to the driver before the accident, bank records of suspicious transfers, medical reports that had been altered. Most damning of all was the recording from Mei Lin's phone, where his uncle had practically confessed to everything. They entered together, drawing curious looks from the assembled guests. Wang Jun stood at the front of the room with a thin, elegant woman who must be Liu Kaifan. His uncle's smile faltered slightly when he saw Mei Lin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wang Jun began, tapping his glass for attention. "We're here tonight to celebrate a new chapter in the Wang family legacy. My nephew, Wang Yinan, has returned to us and will soon be joined in marriage to the lovely Liu Kaifan, strengthening our business partnerships and ensuring a bright future for Wang Industries." Jin stepped forward, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Actually, Uncle Yi, I have a different announcement to make." The projector screen behind Wang Jun flickered to life, showing security camera footage from the night of the accident. The assembled crowd watched in silence as Wang Jun handed an envelope to Jin's driver, their faces clearly visible. "This was taken 2 hours before my car crashed," Jin said, his voice steady. "But that's not all." The screen changed to show financial records, transfer documents, altered medical reports. "While I was missing, someone tried to strip this company of its assets. Someone tried to destroy everything my father built." Wang Jun's face had gone pale. "These are lies, fabrications. This girl," he pointed at Mei Lin, "she's poisoned your mind against your own family." "Family?" Jin laughed without humor. "Is that what you call trying to kill your nephew? Keeping your brother sedated in a hospital?" He pulled out his phone, playing the recording from Mei Lin's apartment. Wang Jun's voice filled the room, talking about sacrifices and accidents. The crowd began to murmur. Security personnel moved closer to Wang Jun, who was looking desperately for an escape route. Liu Kaifan had already stepped away from him, her face a mask of shock. "It's over, Uncle," Jin said quietly. "The police have everything. The real board members, not just your supporters, have seen the evidence." "Even Liu Rong testified about your plans." Wang Jun lunged suddenly, grabbing Mei Lin and pulling her against him. "You think you've won," he snarled. "You're still that same soft-hearted fool who wanted to waste money on worker benefits and environmental projects. You're not fit to run this company." Instead of struggling, Mei Lin stomped hard on his foot and twisted away, just like she'd practiced with the security team. Wang Jun stumbled, and 2 undercover officers grabbed him before he could recover. As the police led him away, Jin turned to the stunned crowd. Wang Industries was built on trust and innovation, not greed and corruption. My father understood that. I lost my memory, but living among ordinary people taught me what really matters. This company will return to its true values. He reached for Mei Lin's hand, not caring who saw, and will do it with help from someone who reminded me what integrity looks like. The crowd erupted in chaos. Reporters who'd been invited to cover the engagement were shouting questions. Board members were arguing amongst themselves. Security was clearing the room. But Jin just held onto Mei Lin's hand, feeling like he could finally breathe properly for the first time since regaining his memories. "I have one more stop to make," he told her softly. "Will you come with me?" She squeezed his hand. "Always." They left the ballroom together, heading for the hospital where his father lay waiting. It was time to wake him up and tell him everything. About the accident, about Wang Jun's betrayal, about finding love and purpose in an unexpected place. It was time for the truth to finally set them all free. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors. Jin sat beside his father's bed, holding the older man's hand as he finished telling him everything. About the accident, about losing his memory, about Mei Lin and her kindness, about Wang Jun's betrayal and how they'd stopped him. His father had woken up 3 days ago, shortly after the doctors stopped the unnecessary sedatives Wang Jun had ordered. He was weak but alert, his mind sharp as ever. "So," Mr. Wang said finally, his voice rough from disuse, "this girl, the one who took you in, she had no idea who you were." "None," Jin smiled, remembering those early days. "She just saw someone who needed help and didn't hesitate." His father was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city skyline. "And now that you remember everything, now that you're Wang Yinan again, I'm still Jin too," he said slowly. "Those months taught me something important. Being Wang Yinan, the heir to Wang Industries, that's part of who I am. But it's not all I am." A nurse came in to check Mr. Wang's vitals, and Jin stepped out into the hallway where Mei Lin was waiting. She'd changed back into her normal clothes, looking more comfortable than she had in the borrowed dress. "How is he?" she asked. "Better, stronger." Jin ran a hand through his hair, a habit he'd picked up from her. "He wants to meet you properly." Mei Lin's eyes widened. "What? No, I'm not. I should probably go. You need family time and—" He caught her hand before she could leave. "Hey, you are family. You and Auntie Hua. You took me in when I had nothing. You gave me a home, not just a place to stay." Later that evening, Jin drove to the market district. The streets were quieter now. Most vendors packed up for the day. He parked in front of Mei Lin's building and climbed the familiar stairs, remembering how she'd helped him up these same steps that first rainy night. Auntie Hua opened the door before he could knock. She looked him up and down, taking in his expensive suit and carefully styled hair. "So, the rich boy returns." "Auntie," he said softly, bowing slightly. "I came to apologize for the things I said when I left, for putting you and Mei Lin in danger." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside to let him in. The apartment looked exactly the same, cramped but cozy, with the mismatched furniture and the slightly crooked photos on the walls. It felt more like home than his massive penthouse ever had. "Mei Lin's on the roof," Auntie Hua said. "She goes up there to think these days." She grabbed his arm as he passed. "Just remember, she may not have your money or your education, but her heart is worth more than your whole company." Jin found Mei Lin in her usual spot, sitting on an old plastic chair, looking out at the city lights. She'd helped him through so many confused nights up here, listening to his fractured memories, never pushing, just being there. "I'm not staying at the company," he said without preamble. She turned, surprised. "What? But it's your inheritance, your responsibility. The company has good people who can run it. Liu Rong, the board members who weren't corrupt, they know what they're doing. I'll keep my shares, have a say in major decisions, but—" He sat down next to her. "I watched you help people every day, not with grand gestures or million yuan donations, but with small kindnesses. A free meal for someone down on their luck, an extra bun for the kids from the orphanage. That's the kind of difference I want to make." "Jin," she said softly, but he wasn't finished. "I was thinking about starting a community development project, something to help small business owners, provide education and resources. Maybe even some microloans." He looked at her hopefully. "I could use a partner who knows what people really need." Mei Lin was quiet for a long time. "You don't have to do this," she finally said. "You don't have to choose between your worlds. And you definitely don't have to choose me. I'm not choosing between worlds." He reached for her hand. "I'm choosing to build a better one. And I'm not choosing you out of guilt or obligation. I'm choosing you because you saw me, really saw me, when I didn't even know myself." The city hummed below them, millions of lives intersecting in countless ways. Somewhere down there, his father was getting stronger, ready to help guide him without controlling him. Somewhere, Wang Jun was facing justice for his crimes. But up here, on this rooftop, Jin was exactly where he wanted to be. "So," he squeezed Mei Lin's hand, "want to change the world with me?" She laughed, the sound bright and clear in the night air. "Well, someone has to keep you from paying full price for everything." Jin pulled her close, feeling her smile against his shoulder. He might be Wang Yinan, heir to a corporate empire, but his heart would always be Jin, the lost boy who found his way home in a rainy alley. 6 months could change everything. The old market street was almost unrecognizable, but in a good way. The cracked pavement had been repaired. New awnings provided shelter from sun and rain, and proper drainage systems prevented flooding. But the heart of the place, the vendors, the community, the life, remained the same. The biggest change was the small storefront that used to be an abandoned electronics shop. Now it housed the Golden Legacy wine shop, with its warm wooden shelves and carefully curated selection of bottles. The sign above the door featured both Chinese and English text, and in smaller letters, a partnership of Wanglin Community Development. Jin stood behind the counter, showing an elderly customer different rice wine options. His expensive suits were long gone, replaced by comfortable clothes that let him move easily between the shop floor and the community center they'd built next door. He still looked a bit too polished for the neighborhood, but now it was just part of his charm. "This one," he was saying, holding up a bottle. "He was aged in traditional clay pots. The maker is a small family operation in Shaoxing. They've been using the same methods for 4 generations. His eyes lit up as he talked, sharing not just knowledge but genuine enthusiasm. The bell above the door chimed as Mei Lin walked in, carrying a stack of papers. She'd been at the community center, teaching a basic business skills class to local vendors. Her eyes met Jin's and they shared a smile. These moments of catching each other in the middle of their work never got old. "Mrs. Zhang," Mei Lin greeted the customer warmly. "Finding something good to celebrate your grandson's graduation. Your young man here has been very helpful," Mrs. Zhang said, patting Jin's hand. "Though I still remember when he couldn't make change without counting on his fingers." After Mrs. Zhang left with her carefully wrapped bottle, Mei Lin perched on a stool behind the counter. "The business class went well," she said. "Old Mr. Chen finally agreed to try keeping digital records for his noodle shop." "You're more patient than I am," Jin laughed. It took him 3 months just to accept using a calculator. Their success had started small. The wine shop was their first project, using Mei Lin's award-winning brand name and Jin's knowledge of wines, but they didn't stop there. The community center offered classes in everything from basic accounting to computer skills. They provided small business loans with reasonable terms, helped vendors upgrade their equipment, and worked with the city to improve infrastructure. Wang Industries supported their projects, but as a partner, not an owner. Jin's father, now fully recovered, had approved of his son's choice. "You're still building something," he'd said, "just not what I expected." "And that's good." The shop's phone rang. Liu Rong, calling about their latest proposal to expand the program to other neighborhoods. As Jin talked business, Mei Lin watched him with a smile. He moved so naturally between worlds now, explaining wine vintages to local grandmothers 1 minute, discussing investment strategies with corporate executives the next. "They approved the funding," he announced after hanging up. "We can start looking at locations in the Eastern District." "We should celebrate," Mei Lin said. "Remember that little restaurant where we had dinner the night I won the naming contest?" Jin's face softened. "Of course I remember. I was so scared someone would recognize me, but all I could think about was how beautiful you looked when you talked about your dreams for the future." "Sweet talker." She threw a cork at him, which he caught easily. "I was thinking about my mother's dumplings, actually. She's trying out a new filling recipe tonight. Auntie Hua's dumplings beat fancy restaurants any day," Jin agreed. He started closing up the shop, moving through the evening routine with practiced ease. "You know, when I first woke up in your apartment, I was terrified. I didn't know who I was, where I came from, anything about my past. And now I know exactly who I am." He finished locking up and took her hand. "I'm the guy who's going to be late for Auntie Hua's dumplings if we don't hurry." They walked home through the market streets, greeting vendors closing up for the day. The air was rich with the scent of cooking food and the sound of families calling each other home. Their 2 worlds had merged into something new, something better than either of them had imagined possible. The news crew packed up their cameras while Mei Lin straightened the items on her desk. Another interview done. Another story about the Market Street Miracle, how a small wine shop had grown into a movement that was changing neighborhoods across the city. "You're getting better at those," Jin said from the doorway of her office. He'd been watching from behind the scenes, smiling at how naturally she handled the questions now. "Remember your first interview? You were so nervous you knocked over their microphone." "Don't remind me," she groaned. But she was smiling too. Her office in the community center was small, but bright, its walls covered with photos of successful program graduates. Mr. Chen with his now thriving noodle restaurant, Mrs. Liu's expanded flower shop, the young couple who'd turned their food cart into a popular cafe. "Wang Industries called," Jin said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "They want to partner with us on the new training program, on our terms this time." It wasn't the first such offer they'd received. Their success had caught the attention of major corporations, all wanting to be part of the core community revival movement. But Jin and Mei Lin were careful about who they worked with, making sure their partners understood that profit wasn't the only measure of success. "What did your father say?" Mei Lin asked, knowing Mr. Wang still acted as Jin's unofficial advisor. "He said we should consider it, but not to let them push us around," Jin grinned. "Then he asked when you're making those spicy noodles again. I think he likes you more than me now." "Well, I never crashed his car or gave him gray hairs," Mei Lin teased. She looked at her calendar, packed with meetings and classes and community events. "Speaking of food, we're still on for the street food festival this weekend. The vendors are excited about showing off their new skills." The street food festival was their latest project, showcasing the local vendors who'd completed their business development program. The whole market street would be transformed into an outdoor dining area, with string lights and live music. Even some high-end restaurant critics had promised to attend. That evening, they walked home together, taking the long route through their old haunts. The alley where Mei Lin had found Jin was now clean and well lit, part of their neighborhood safety initiative. They always paused there briefly, remembering. "I've been thinking," Jin said as they climbed the stairs to what was now their shared apartment. They'd kept it instead of moving somewhere fancier, though they had renovated the building for all the tenants. "About what you said last week, about helping people the way you helped me." "Oh," Mei Lin unlocked their door, breathing in the familiar scent of home. Auntie Hua's plants filled the windowsills. She'd moved to a ground-floor apartment in the same building, claiming the stairs were too much, but everyone knew she just wanted to give them their space. "What if we started a program specifically for people who need a second chance? Not just business loans, but real support, housing, job training, healthcare." He pulled out his tablet, showing her the draft proposal he'd been working on. "We could call it the Golden Legacy Foundation." Mei Lin took the tablet, scrolling through his ideas. Jin, this is amazing, but it's a huge undertaking. Bigger than taking in a stranger with amnesia." She laughed, remembering how scared she'd been that first night, how uncertain. Now here they were, planning to help others the same way. "We'll need partners. Support from the city, maybe even the national level. Already got some interested parties. Liu Rong's been helping me make connections, and Dad thinks it's a good idea. Says it's time for the Wang name to stand for something more than just business success." Mei Lin set down the tablet and wrapped her arms around him. Who would have thought that lost boy in the rain would end up changing so many lives? "You changed mine first," he said softly, holding her close. For everything else just followed from that. Outside their window, the market street was coming alive with evening activity. Vendors were setting up for the night market, their voices carrying up through the warm air. String lights twinkled along the storefronts, many of them new or renovated, but still keeping their original character. Modern and traditional, old and new, all working together, just like them. The heir who'd lost everything and found something better. The girl who'd helped a stranger and ended up helping her whole community. Their story had become part of the neighborhood's legend, but the truth was better than any legend. It was real, messy, and perfectly imperfect. Rain drummed against the windows, much like it had that night 2 years ago. Jin stood in the alley, getting soaked despite his umbrella, waiting for Mei Lin to arrive. He'd asked her to meet him here after work, and she'd given him a strange look, but agreed. The Golden Legacy Foundation was launching tomorrow. They'd spent months preparing, setting up programs, arranging funding, coordinating with government agencies. It would be their biggest project yet, a chance to take everything they'd learned and help people across the country. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about something much more personal. He heard her footsteps splashing through puddles before he saw her. She was running, trying to stay dry under a newspaper. "Jin, what are you doing out here in the rain? Are you crazy?" "Maybe a little," he smiled, sharing his umbrella. "But I had to bring you here. This exact spot." She looked around the alley, understanding dawning on her face. "Where we first met, though you were considerably more unconscious at the time. I was thinking about that moment, how everything in my life changed, because you decided to help a stranger in the rain." He took her hand, feeling the slight tremor in his own. "You know, when I got my memories back, I thought I was reclaiming my old life, but I wasn't. I was starting a new one, a better one, because of you." Mei Lin squeezed his hand. "We built this new life together." "We did, and that's why I wanted to bring you here." He reached into his pocket with his free hand. "This is where my story with you began. It seems right that this is where I ask you to write the next chapter with me." He pulled out a small box, and Mei Lin's eyes widened. Inside wasn't a flashy diamond ring. He knew her better than that. Instead, it was a simple jade band, carved with a pattern of raindrops and cherry blossoms. "I'm not asking as Wang Yinan, heir to Wang Industries," he said softly. "I'm asking as Jin, the guy who still can't bargain properly and burns rice when he's distracted. The one who fell in love with you over steamed buns and business classes and late-night talks on the roof." Mei Lin was crying now, though she'd probably blame it on the rain. "You're both," she said. "Jin and Yinan. That's who I fell in love with. The lost boy who found his way home and the man who decided to help others find theirs too. Is that a yes?" She laughed through her tears. "You haven't actually asked me anything yet." "Oh, right." He got down on one knee, not caring about the puddle soaking through his pants. "Mei Lin, will you marry me? Help me run this foundation, build more community centers, maybe burn some rice together." "Yes," she said, pulling him up and into a kiss. To all of it. Later that night, they celebrated with both families. Auntie Hua making her special dumplings while Mr. Wang poured expensive wine. Their small apartment was crowded with people who'd been part of their journey. Lu Rong raised a toast to their success, both professional and personal. Mr. Zhang from security was there with his wife, as were several vendors from the market who'd become close friends. Looking around the room, Jin saw their two worlds perfectly merged. Corporate executives chatting with street vendors, his father teaching Auntie Hua about wine pairings, Mei Lin's former business students sharing tips with Wang Industries managers. Tomorrow, they would launch their foundation. Tomorrow they would start helping more people write their own success stories. But tonight was about remembering where it all began, with a simple act of kindness on a rainy night. "What are you thinking about?" Mei Lin asked, finding him by the window. "About fate," he said, pulling her close. "About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened." "Pretty lucky accident," she teased. "It wasn't luck," he said seriously. "It was you, your kindness, your strength, your heart. You saved more than my life that night. You showed me what kind of person I wanted to be." Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, making everything glow softly. Somewhere out there, someone else might be lost, might be needing help. Tomorrow, they would work on building a world where help was easier to find. But tonight, in this small apartment filled with love and laughter, they were exactly where they needed to be. Two people from different worlds who had found something remarkable together. Not just love, but purpose. Not just success, but meaning. The lost heir and the kind stranger had found their way home, and in doing so, had created a new kind of legacy. One built not on wealth or power, but on compassion, community, and the simple truth that sometimes the greatest acts of love start with helping a stranger in the rain.